Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on SUBSTACK. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural. And this week, our episode is going to go back into the Old West, the Wild, Wild West, something titled Phantoms of the Old West. And we're just going to go into all these different types of urban legends, ghost stories. Some of them, you could tell they're mostly made up, for lack of a better word, but you always get the feeling that there's a kernel of truth. And in some of there obviously is a lot of truth in them, but they're great ghost stories anyway. Now, listen close, partner. Out here on the ghost roads, the past don't stay buried. It rides, it screams, it waits in the moonlight for the next fool to wander by. America's Old West wasn't just cattle drives and six guns. It was a land soaked in blood, betrayal, and bad medicine. And sometimes the dead keep right on living. From the eternal springs of California to the red rock badlands of Arizona and the lonely mesas of Texas, the frontier left behind more than tumbleweeds and rusty spurs. It left phantoms. Let's ride. First one is the Red Door Saloon in Paso Robles, California. The little town of Paso Robles along the Salinas River. The hot springs still bubble like they did when the Spaniards first came. But one street remembers the wild times better than the rest, Pine Street. Once the stagecoach stopped, it became the Tenderloin where miners, ranchers, gunslingers, and outlaws raised hell, and right in the middle stood the Red Door Saloon. 2 stories of sin, billiards, and cards downstairs. Upstairs, a brothel where the James boys themselves, Jesse and Frank, were known to drink and carouse when their uncle Drury James ran the local land grant. They renamed it the Pine Street Saloon, but the swinging doors still creak the same, and on quiet nights the bottles rattle on their own. Glasses slide across the bar. Upstairs, footsteps pace where no living soul walks. Paranormal Cruise came calling. The Dead Files in 2017, Ghost Adventures in 2021. They all left convinced something still drinks there. Something that never paid its tab. But nothing compares to the horror that earned its name on a grassy plateau jutting into the Blanco Canyon Reservoir. It's located about 18 miles from the cap rock of Blanco Canyon, wedged up between the fork of the Catfish, sometimes called the White or Blanco River. They used to call it the holding point. Steep 200-foot drop on one side, nature's own corral, perfect for holding 1,000 head of cattle. Until 1889. A trail boss named Sawyer had a problem. A new homestead sat right on his grazing land. Instead of going around, he made a fatal choice. A storm rolled in, black clouds boiling, lightning cracked. Sawyer drew his pistol and fired into the air. Over 1,000 steers exploded into a stampede, straight through the homestead, crushing men, women, and children beneath their hooves. They didn't stop at the cliff. They hurled themselves into the abyss. Sawyer left the bodies where they lay, human and animal, and drove what was left of his herd on. He was never hired again. He vanished from history, but the Mesa remembered. They renamed it Stampede Mesa, and the dead cattle came back. In 1902, cowboy Lou Schuyler and his partner George Ramp stood night watch there. What they saw still chills the blood. White, glowing cattle, floating silent, rising out of the brush like mist. No sound, no footprints. Lon's steady horse nearly bucked them into the next county. When the spectral herd charged, the boys barely turned the living cattle in time. 200 heads still went screaming over the edge. Since then, when lightning splits the sky, whole herds still plunge to their deaths. Ghostly cowboys on spectral horses ride the clouds. Disembodied shrieks echo across the rocks. Even today, ranchers won't hold cattle there after dark. However, there is another version to this dark story. As Sawyer was driving through Dockham Flats on the way to the Mesa, about 40 cows of a Nestor, another name for an old settler, came bellowing into the herd. "Drive him on!" Sawyer yelled tersely, for he was short of hands. It was late, and his cattle were thin and tired. He planned not to disturb them, just to cut out a few cows. "I'll stampede the whole bunch if you don't get out my cattle," the Nestor threatened. But Sawyer, who was characterized as hard as nails, told the Nestor to go to hell and went on with his business. That night, the settler made good on his word. Riding wildly around, he waved a blanket, shot his gun, and shouted. The herd stampeded over the edge. Two of the cowboys were swept over the bluff, but the Nestor escaped by the mysterious way he came. The next day, Sawyer ordered the Nestor to be brought in, dead or alive, and when they found him, he was tied up with a rawhide lariat to the back of his horse. The animal was blindfolded and backed off the mesa. Thus the Nestor was killed. Old cowpunchers told of seeing the Nestor's ghost astride his blindfolded horse galloping over the country behind a crowd of phantom steers. At times he's heard calling out to the herd, and their answering lows echo across the landscape. A song was born from this nightmare. Stan Jones recorded Ghost Riders in the Sky in 1948. It became the most recorded Western song ever. It inspired the Doors, and maybe even a certain fiery-skulled Marvel rider. But the question lingers. Was there something evil already living on that land? Something that whispered to Sawyer and made him pull that trigger? In the remote, rugged expanse of the Big Bend country along the Rio Grande in southwest Texas, there's another story about another phantom herd. This is the place where desert and mountains guard many secrets. Among them is a tale of a lost canyon said to shelter a phantom herd of buffalo. Placid, grazing animals glimpsed only by accident or by a lone Mexican rider from across the border. Like a mirage, the valley and its ghostly herd vanish when pursued, existing somewhere in the folds of the hills, yet forever elusive. This sighting dates back after scores of buffalo had been decimated from the land. Tied to this land of apparitions is a more tangible yet equally haunting figure, a spectral brindle bull, branded forever with the word murder and the date of a killing. Known as the murder steer or ghost steer, its legend embodies the violence, range feuds, and lingering curses of the open range era in Brewster County. The story begins during a winter roundup near Leoncita Springs in Brewster County. In the days of the open range, small outfits and large cattle companies gathered unbranded calves, mavericks, in the fall and again in January for late stragglers. A respected roundup boss settled ownership disputes, often by examining brands on mother cows. The largest outfit in the area, Wentworth and Dubois, viewed smaller ranchers as parasites who built their herds by rustling calves. They sent a hardened representative, a gunman named Fine or Phineas Gilliland, to protect their interests and intimidate rivals. Also present was a notorious Emmanuel Clemens, also known as Manny Clemens, cousin to the infamous gunslinger John Wesley Hardin, and connected by marriage to assassin Killin' Jim Miller. A motherless brindle bull calf became the flashpoint. One-armed Confederate veteran Henry Harrison Powell, a mild-mannered rancher with the HHP brand, claimed the calf. Multiple witnesses, including the roundup boss, confirmed they had seen it following a cow wearing a Poe's brand. Gilliland disagreed and aggressively separated the calf, driving it back to the main herd. Young Bob Powell, Henry's son, told Gilliland the boss had assigned it to them. Gilliland snarled that Poe could have it only if he produced the mother cow. Henry Powell, unarmed at first, saw the commotion and confronted Gilliland. Words grew heated. Poe borrowed a pistol from Manny Clemens, returned to the herd, and tried to cut the calf out. Again, Gilliland attempted to rope it and missed. Powell fired at the calf, missing in frustration or desperation. Gilliland dismounted, dropped to one knee, and opened fire. Several shots cracked at close range. When the smoke cleared, Henry Powell lay dead. Gilliland seized Clemens' horse and fled. Bob Powell rode to Alpine to alert authorities. Days later, Brewster County Deputy Sheriff Dallas Cook and Texas Ranger Jim Putnam tracked Gilliland. In a snowy canyon, Cook asked the stranger if he was Find Gilliland. The man drew and fired, wounding Cook in the knee and killing his horse. Putnam dismounted, took cover with his Winchester, and waited. When Gilliland raised up from behind his fallen horse, Putnam shot him between the eyes. The canyon where he died still bears the name Gilliland Canyon. In the shock and remorse following the killing, no one claimed the calf. The cowboys dragged it to the branding fire and seared murder on one flank, and January 28 or January 28, 91 on the other. They left it unearmarked and uncastrated, turning it loose to roam the range. The animal grew into a huge, mean bull with glowing red eyes. In the telling, it became the murder steer, an outcast harbinger of doom. Sightings sped across West Texas. Crossing its path supposedly brought bad luck or death. One tale claims cowboys in the Wentworth and Dubois bunkhouses saw the red-eyed beast staring through a window at a man. The next day, that cowboy died in a tragic accident. Folklorist J. Frank Dobie popularized the story in The Longhorns, and it inspired variations, including an episode of the TV series Rawhide. Some versions claim the steer appeared as an omen whenever foul play was afoot or justice was closing in. The real steer reportedly lived until around 1905, when it was driven north in a herd to Indian reservations in Montana and presumably slaughtered. Yet the legend outlived the flesh and blood animal. Storyteller Wigfall Van Sickle, a lawyer and later Brewster County judge, added colorful embellishments, including claims of personally seeing the branded bull that helped cement its ghostly status. The murder steer endures as a symbol of the Big Bend's violent frontier past. Range wars between big outfits and small ranchers, quick trigger justice, and the harsh code of the open range. Like the phantom buffalo herds in the Lost Canyon, it appears when the land chooses, ephemeral, ominous, and impossible to fully capture. In the lonely draws and mesas of the Big Bend, where the Rio Grande carves ancient stone and the wind whispers through greasewood, the murder steer still roams in memory, a branded reminder that some feuds never truly die, and some ghosts wear brands instead of chains. Further north in the rugged Badlands of South Dakota, another spirit keeps watch. They call her the Watchdog. By moonlight, on a barren hill she stands, a woman in the distance. Call to her, and she throws her arms wide, letting out an ear-piercing shriek that turns your blood to ice. Then she's gone. Dead silence follows. Sometimes she brings a friend, a fleshless skeleton that sits just beyond the firelight when music plays. Bob its heads in time, hand it a fiddle or a guitar, and it will play like the devil himself before vanishing into the night. Follow that melody and you'll never be seen again. Some say she was murdered in an Indian raid. Others believe the skeleton is a cowboy who died mid-song and can't rest until the tune is finished. Either way, the butte is shunned. Even the cattle won't graze there. Orbs of light shoot across the hills like lost souls. Her story echoes the weeping woman known as La Llorona across the southwest, the beautiful lady in white who drowned her own children in a jealous rage and now wanders riverbanks sobbing for them eternally. And in Utah's Spring Canyon, another lady in white haunts the abandoned coal mines. Miners swore she appeared in the gloom, beautiful and beckoning, only to lead men deeper into collapsing tunnels where they were never found. Even after the boomtowns crumbled to dust, she still calls from the mouth of darkness. Down in the no man's land between the Rio Grande and the Nueces, outlaws ruled and the Texas Rangers rode hard. In 1850, cattle rustler Vidal made the mistake of stealing from two living legends, Creed Taylor and Bigfoot Wallace. They caught him. They shot him. Then they made an example. They severed his head, strapped his corpse back onto his horse, fixed his sombrero to the skull, and turned the animal loose. For years, travelers saw the headless rider, El Muerto, galloping across the brush. His horse breathed fire. Lightning flashed from its hooves. He screamed, "It's mine! It is all mine!" Sightings continued into the 1960s. Some say he still rides the back roads of Duval, Jim Wells, and Live Oak counties, especially near Headless Horseman Hill. In the Arizona desert of 1883, something worse than any horse appeared. Two women and their children were alone when Geronimo's warriors were raiding. One woman went for water. Screams, then a massive red shape, ridden by the devil, thundered past the cabin. They found her trampled to death. Giant cloven hoofprints, reddish hairs in the brush. Prospectors later saw the beast, a huge red camel with a dead man lashed to its back. A skull dropped from it. It wailed like a demon. Years later, a rancher finally shot the creature. Its hide was scarred, wrapped in old rawhide that had grown into the flesh. It was one of the last survivors of the U.S. Army Camel Corps. But what or who had written it for so many years? Then we go to a place known as Misery Hill. Tom Bowers worked his claim alone on Misery Hill, near Pike City. He kept no partner and showed no patience for the rough men who drifted through camp. Then one day he vanished. Miners followed his tracks through fresh snow, from his cabin to the lip of a steep slope where he had been digging. There the trail stopped, cold. A landslide had swallowed it whole. They later pulled his body from far below and gave him a proper burial. Still, whispers spread. Men swore they saw Bowers walking at the mouth of his abandoned shaft. Before long, no one dared work that ground. Then came thriftless Jim Brandon. Seized by a rare fit of ambition, he took up Bowers' claim. For a spell the mine paid. Gold dust filled his poke, and even squared accounts with men who had long since written him off. But the mountain does not share kindly. Each morning Jim found the sluice disturbed, the water running, though he had shut it tight the night before. Someone worked his claim under the cover of darkness. Jim searched the gulch and timber, but he found no trespasser. He warned the boys in camp that the joke had gone stale. One night he primed his rifle and took up watch from a shadowed nook. The tamarocks crooned in the wind, the yuba whispered through the canyon. The Sierras gleamed pale and distant beneath a hard scatter of stars. Moving slowly and quietly, Jim crept for a better vantage, and came upon a tree with something nailed to its trunk. It glimmered in the dark like a struck match. By its own faint light he read, "Notice, I, Thomas Bowers, claim this ground for placer mining." Jim reached to tear it free. A cold shock shot through his hand, and his arm fell useless at his side. The notice vanished. Then came the sound of water running. Jim cursed, snatched up his rifle, and turned toward the sluice. Behind them, the words flared again, burning pale on the bark. Now came the scrape of metal and gravel. Jim dropped low and crawled closer. There, bent to the work, stood Tom Bowers, dead, drawn thin, his head and face hid beneath a wild growth of white hair. From hollow black sockets, his eyes burned like coal. Jim raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the canyon. A terrible yell answered it, and the dead man charged, swift as a storm wind, brandishing pick and shovel in either hand. Jim ran. He tore uphill, through brush and ditch, through timber and stone, the specter close behind him, all the way to the edge of Pike City. In the saloon, miners drank hard and danced to celebrate a new strike. Boots thundered, glasses rang, laughter spilled into the night, until a crash split the noise, followed by a single scream, then silence. The men rushed into the road. They found Jim's rifle lying in the dust. Nearby rested a pick and shovel, the handles carved with the letters TB. Jim Brandon never returned, and on Misery Hill the sluice still runs every night. Then there's the story of the Forever Riders. Among the sandstone columns of the Colorado foothills rose the lodge of Taingaro, first falling thunder. Swift in the chase and fierce in battle, he kept apart from neighboring tribes. He chose the quiet company of his wife Sagana, the bird. Together they often rode to a lonely trading post along the New Mexico frontier, where they bartered beaver and wild sheepskins for powder, clothes, and steel. At that post a Spanish trader set his eye on Sagana. Her beauty stirred a darker hunger in him. He devised a scheme. With honeyed words he sent Taingaro deep into the mountains on a false errand, promising that Sakana would rest safely within the fort until her husband's return. On the trail, Taingaro paused in the sacred spring of Manitou Springs. He drank deeply, then cast beads and wampum into the bubbling water as an offering. The spring rejected his gift. The beads rose and scattered upon the surface. As he stared, troubled, the water gathered into a vision, Sakana's face twisted in anguish. He wasted no breath on prayer. He leapt to his horse and rode hard, sparing neither himself nor the animal beneath him. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, yet he did not slow. At last he reached the trading post. The Spaniard had fled. Taingaro turned without a word and drove his weary horse toward the foothills. Morning light broke as he neared his lodge. Hope flared when he saw Sakana standing at the door. Her voice lifted in song. He called to her. She glanced at him with an empty eyes and turned away, her song unbroken. She did not know him. Madness had taken her mind. From her broken words, Taingaro learned the truth, the traitor's betrayal, the ruin left behind. His cry split the air, a sound of grief and fury that shook the hills. For a single heartbeat, clarity returned to her gaze. She looked upon him with sudden recognition and unbearable sorrow. Then she drew his knife. Before he could move, she drove the blade into her own heart and fell at his feet. He stood for hours, silent as stone, the world drained of meaning. At last the old strength returned. He set his lodge in order, fed his horse, and wrapped Sakana's body in buffalo hide. Exhaustion claimed him, and he slept like the dead. 2 nights later he entered the trading post like a shadow. No man saw him pass the guards. He slipped into the Spaniard's room and waited. In the black hours before dawn, Taingaro struck. He clamped a belt across the sleeper's mouth and dropped a lariat over his throat. The Spaniard woke choking, thrashing, but Taingaro bound him fast, hands and feet. He tore open the low roof, forced the captive through, and lowered him outside the fort's walls. Then he lit his revenge. At the embers of a dying fire, he kindled an arrow wrapped in cottonwood and loosed it into a haystack. Flames leapt high. Smoke and panic spread through the compound. Amid the chaos, Taingaro slipped away. A lone sentry glimpsed him and opened his mouth to cry out, but the Indian struck like a panther and silenced him with a single knife stroke. Taingaro dragged the Spaniard to a waiting horse and rode for the foothills. At his lodge he fed the prisoner but answered none of his pleas. He bound them tighter still. Outside, he readied a half-trained horse, wild-eyed and strong. He stripped the Spaniard and lashed him to a crude saddle with rawhide thongs. Then he brought forth Sakana. He tied her body to the man, face to face, death staring into life. With a sharp cry, he loosed the horse. The animal bolted, plunging into the open desert. Taingaro followed close behind on his own steed. At first, the Spaniard fainted. When he woke, terror seized him. He struggled, but every movement pressed him closer to the cold flesh before him. The sun rose high and burned his skin. Sweat poured, blood ran where the cords bit deep. Night fell, and the desert turned cruel with cold. Sleep came only in snatches, each broken by a savage shout from the rider behind. Taingaro gave him water, never food. Day stretched into torment. Hunger hollowed the man. At last, driven beyond reason, he sank his teeth into the dead flesh before him and fed like a beast. Still they rode. Taingaro watched, never far, his gaze fixed on the suffering he had forged. At last a broken, gibbering cry rose from the Spaniard's lips. Madness claimed him. Only then did Taingaro draw rein. He watched the horse carry its burden, dead and living, bound together, far across the desert, until both vanished into the yellow haze. He turned away from his lodge, from memory, from all that had been his life. Across the plains, through brush, sand, and bitter alkali, the riders still wander. Two forms lashed together, driven by a phantom will, circling the endless waste, forever. But it's not only people that are ghosts, there are things that are ghosts as well. Soon after the rails climbed across Marshall Pass, 12,000 feet above the sea, an old engineer named Nelson Edwards took charge of a mountain run. For months he hauled passengers over that savage grade without mishap. Then one night, as he set out for the divide, the world seemed wrong. The silence pressed deeper, the canyon darkened, the air cut colder than any he had known. That morning word came down of a defective rail and a treacherous bridge somewhere along the line. Edwards felt it in his bones as he began the long climb. He cleared the first stretch of snow sheds when a whistle cried out among the ice and stone, thin, distant, and wrong. At the same instant, the gong in his cab rang sharply. He threw his brakes. The conductor came scrambling forward. "What stopped you?" Edward shot back. "Why'd you signal?" "I didn't. Open her up. We've got to meet number 19 at the switch. And there's a wild train climbing behind us." Edwards wasted no more breath. He pulled the throttle, dropped sands on the rails, and drove the engine forward. The train gathered itself and climbed. Behind them, the whistle came again, closer now, shrill with warning. Rounding a curve, Edwards leaned out into the night. A train bore down on them. It came fast, too fast, closing the distance with murderous intent. Sweat broke across his face. He wrenched the throttle wide and drove his engine harder. The train lunged through a drift and burst into another snowshed, flinging powder aside like smoke. Ahead lay the stretch with a broken rail. He did not slow. A greater danger hunted his rear. The fireman shoveled as a man possessed, coal flying, sweat soaking his clothes. Flame roared from the stack, and the cars behind word spread. Passengers dressed in haste and crowded the windows, pale and wide-eyed. Rumor ran among them. A mad engineer chased their train through the mountains. At the summit, Edward cut the steam and let gravity take hold. The train plunged down the grade. He glanced back. In the faint glow of fresh snow he saw the pursuing engine, its driving wheels larger than his own. A tall figure stood atop its cars, arms flailing in frantic signals. At a sharp bend, the truth closed in. 200 yards, that was all that separated them. As Edwards swept the curve, the chasing engineer leaned from his cab and laughed. His face looked pale and slack, like dough left in the cold. Snow thickened, wind screamed down the canyon. Bridges trembled as the trains thundered across them. The cursed bridge loomed ahead. Edwards felt his heart choke his breath, but the train seemed to leap the gap and tear onward. The switch came into view. Number 19 was nowhere to be seen. Edwards released the brakes. The train shot forward like a bullet. Then a red lantern swung on the track ahead. It rocked side to side, a warning or a trap. Behind him, the phantom whistle shrieked. He reversed the lever and set the brakes hard. For a few terrible seconds, he lived inside pure dread, caught between the crash behind and the ruin ahead. Then, nothing. No impact, no scream of metal. Edwards turned. The wild train surged forward, almost upon them. Then the rails seemed to split apart beneath it. The engine pitched sideways, toppled from the grade, and dragged the cars with it. The whole black mass tumbled into the canyon and vanished. Silence swallowed the mountain. No cries rose from below, no hiss of steam, only the long, hollow moan of wind through the dark. The red lantern ahead had vanished too. Edwards did not linger. Another danger still lay ahead. If number 19 moved before he reached the next switch, death would greet him there instead. He drove the train onward through the night and made the second switch in time. By dawn he rolled into Green River, ahead of schedule, though the run had aged him years. As he shut down the engine, he noticed something on the frost that glazed his cab window. Words scrawled as if by an unseen hand. A freight train was wrecked, as you saw. Now that you saw it, you will never make another run. The engine was not under control, and 4 section men were killed. If you ever run on this road again, you will be wrecked. Edwards read it once. He did not wait to read it twice. That very morning he quit the line. He rode east to Denver and took work with the Union Pacific Railroad, leaving the mountain run behind him for good. They searched the canyon the next day. They found no wreck and no engineer who crossed the divide after Nelson Edwards ever spoke of a train that followed in the dark. The Old West never truly died. It just learned how to haunt. It lingers in the wind, in the creak of saloon doors, and in the thunder that rolls across empty mesas. So next time you're out under a big western sky and you hear thunder with no clouds or hooves where no horse should be, out here the past rides with us still. Listen closely on a lonely trail. Keep riding, partner. And whatever you do, don't look back.